Hello, and welcome to Good News Rhode Island. We talk about people who are here, who are changing Rhode Island, but today we're going to talk about somebody who's 403 years old or something. Roger Williams is here with us, and I have to say we're very honored. Thank you for coming, sir.
Well, thank you very much.
Also, John McNiff, who is a ranger at the Roger Williams Memorial. Thank you for being here. I understand that you were born in 1603, but nobody can find your birth certificate.
This is something that many people do not keep track of, the birth date. The official records were burned up in the Great Fire of London in 1663. That would be baptismal records after the birth. But somewhere in that neighborhood is when I was born. It's not something that we continue to celebrate each year. So it could be that year or it could be another.
Okay, and you were baptized Anglican?
Yes, in the Church of England.
So your father was a merchant tailor.
Aye.
That sounds very important. You lived comfortably in a part of London called Smithfield.
Smithfield section.
And what does a merchant tailor do?
Merchant tailor is not just someone that sells clothing. A merchant tailor is the one that makes the bespoke suits for the members of Parliament and the members of court. So there would be many people coming into my father's place wishing the finest of clothing that England could offer. And my father was a member of the Merchant Tailors Guild, which was one of the finest and oldest guilds in London. My mother was a tavern keeper.
You were an Anglican and you became a Puritan in college, and your father was not happy.
No. There's a tremendous amount of religious upheaval in England at this time. The Church of England, the established church, if you would, reinforced under James, King James I, it's not about faith, it's about power. If you take a look at English history, go back to Henry VIII. He was a king, and he was also a Roman Catholic, given an award by the Pope in Rome as a defender of the faith. But when he wished for a divorce, he did break with the Roman Church and establish the Church of England, seize the Roman Catholic Church properties and given them away to his friends, establishing the established Church of England with himself at the head. When Henry died, his son Edward became king, and not having a great affection for the established church or for the Roman Catholic Church, did bring the Presbyterian Church in. Now, Edward was only king for a very short time, and when he died, his sister and Henry's first daughter, Mary, became queen. She was a staunch Roman Catholic and did persecute anyone who did try to break away from that Roman Catholic Church, seized back the church properties, persecuted all members of the Church of England or any other Protestant church, as they call them. When Mary died, Elizabeth became queen and did reestablish the Church of England. You see, if you wish to be a good Englishman, you must keep changing churches to fit the whims of the crown.
And there were very serious consequences if you didn't change.
Up until death.
Yes.
And your property would be seized. Your heirs and your children and heirs until generations would lose everything. So this was not about faith. This was not about the Word of God. This was about power.
So you saw all this, and you saw persecutions as well. You saw people being burned and hanged. And
that's what Smithfield was. That was the place of religious persecution. When I was a very small child, there was one person that was taken there and burned at the stake for being a heretic, if you would. This is not something that you wish to see.
So post-traumatic stress, you would say, at least. It would certainly be traumatizing.
It is something that lends an import to understanding what people will do and to what ends they will go for their faith.
And also how it affects children would be a sign of what Roger did. So you went to Cambridge. That's pretty, impressive, I should say. I was going to say
my mentor was the Chief Justice of England, Sir Edward Coke. And he did send me to Charterhouse and then on to Cambridge, to Pembroke College at Cambridge. Sir Edward Coke was the first person to try to codify English law, to spell out why the law says what it does, going all the way back to the Magna Carta. And in doing so, he did put himself at odds with James, our king. For James wished to rule by decree. Sir Edward Coke says even the king is subject to the law. The king cannot just levy a tax on people. It must go through Parliament, who are the representatives of the people of England. There is a phrase that Sir Edward Coke did coin, if you would, that many people are familiar with. A man's home is his castle, that each person and their belongings belong to them. without government interference. And Sir Edward Coke, at one point at court, got the king so enraged that the king did actually stand up from his throne. This is not something you wish to see. Sir Edward immediately bowed and apologized, but shortly thereafter was sent to the Tower. This was all as I am going to Cambridge at Pembroke.
So you learned, on one hand, the value of the individual and the possibility for governance of the individual within that whole large government.
Exactly.
And you also learned about monarchy, or what would you call it? It's almost dictatorship.
Well, the crown is the crown. I mean, they see themselves as appointed by God, as God's appointed on this earth. It says so in all their documents. If you see it, it says, for example, our charter from the king says, Charles II, by the grace of God, king. He is God's appointed one. So if you're going against him, you're going against God, at least in their mind. What I saw was them using religion for political purposes. They had corrupted each other, both religion and politics. And I saw no other way to get down to the core of things. For faith is far more important than just daily living. Faith is your eternal soul. And if it's tied up to I have never seen or heard of any government in the history of the world that was not in some ways corrupted by bribery, extortion, assassinations. All these things happen in every government everywhere. Do you want your faith tied to that?
So Roger you decided to come to the United States, or to what we called the New World.
The New World. It truly is a new world.
And when you came here, basically you found woods. And a small settlement, obviously.
Yes. Boston. I came with my wife Mary on the Lion in 1631 to Boston. These were friends of mine, these so-called Puritans, as they say, wished to establish a new place to live. This was a blank slate for them to play with. Here, they could do whatever they wanted. And I found out very quickly that what they wished to do was to set up their beacon on the hill as a light unto old England on how it should become a theocracy or religious government. They were not going to change things. They were going to purify it, simplify it, but in no way reshape what was here. And immediately I got into disagreements with, these are my friends, but I got into disagreements with them about the propriety of this. Here, we had a blank slate. We did not need to recreate the mistakes of the old world, which had ended up in countless thousands of souls being murdered just for faith. Here was an opportunity, and they did not see it.
So they became the persecutors that you were so afraid you had left.
They persecuted anyone that disagreed with them. These, you have to remember, they're young men that know they are right. The crossing of the Atlantic takes 2 months. The motivation to leave England to come across for 2 months to this new world, a new world of different weather, a new world of different animals, a new world of different everything. The motivation to do that is you have to know that you are right. And I did come into the midst of them and say, this is wrong, of course this here is wrong. Of course they were going to be upset with me. But I did hope that they could see the clarity of what I was saying to them.
Which you had learned from Sir Edward Coke.
Some of that from that, and some of that from seeing the way that people behave over the years.
So what did your wife say when you brought her, Mary? Mary Barnard, is that her name?
Yes, Mary Barnard. Her father had been a Puritan preacher. And with the previous administration, he had been told to be quiet about his beliefs. And he did. He quieted down and did not continue his preaching. And it had basically killed him. So she saw in me that same fire burning inside, that I must tell people what I know. And she encouraged me to keep speaking and not to be quiet about this. For she had seen what happens when you are quiet.
So you came here to Plymouth, is that right? And
Originally
then you went to Boston.
Originally to Boston, then up to Salem. And the magistrates in Boston put pressure on Salem, so I must leave there, and I went to Plymouth. Now, at Plymouth, this is when these so-called dangerous ideas that I had did start to come out. I did say that a minister should not be paid. That makes you a mercenary if you're doing it for the money. You should have a regular job in the community, be a working person, and preach in addition to that. It should be God's calling, not the calling of money and mammon.
St. Paul.
Right. So I did need a job. I'm born and brought up in a city, so I'm no farmer, I am no fisherman, I am no hunter. What I am and do know is trade. So I did take the English goods and go out among the people that were local to this place, the Wampanoag, the Narragansett, and all the others. And I did trade with them: knives, kettles, hoes, axes, blankets, coats. And, well, here's one for you. What is the first thing you need to do to trade with someone?
You have to be able to talk to them.
Exactly. So I did learn their language. I did not force them to learn mine. I did learn theirs. And in the process of learning another language, well, anyone that does speak more than one language knows it's not word substitution. There are words for things that are very different. There are ideas that come out in words. You learn about the people when you learn their language. There's a phrase, "Whatchia nitop," which is a phrase of English and Narragansett mixed together. Nitop is their word for friend, for a singular, friend. Their word for many friends is nitampoag, which means friend people. And you get to understand that this means people, not just friends, not just a pluralization of one idea, but these people are my friends. And there's a wonderful feeling about that when you actually look at their words.
So something else happened. You got sent out of Salem again.
Yes.
And something happened in the middle of the night. This is a story that I've heard and that I've always admired you for. Maybe you could tell it in your own words.
Well, here's what had happened. I ran into some problems in Plymouth and went back up to Salem, where they did have me as their minister up there. But the magistrates in Boston did not like me preaching these dangerous ideas. One, that a minister should not be paid. Two, that if you wish to live here, you must make some sort of a deal with the native peoples that live here. It is their land. I did write a letter to King Charles I telling him that he was committing a sin by giving away something that did not belong to him. This upset everyone, for there was factors in England that wished to take over the Massachusetts Bay Charter and did say they cannot control their people over here, speaking of me. They told me to be quiet, and I refused. And then I crossed some line in their book and said, the government has the right to control what you do, but it does not have the right to control what you think or what you believe. Mm-hmm. That is up to the individual, hearkening back to my mentor. A man's home is his castle. A man's soul is so much more his own to determine. Mm-hmm. This was too much for the magistrates in Boston. They did send word for me first to be quiet about these ideas, and I refused. Then they sent soldiers in October of 1635 up to Boston. They did arrest me and bring me back down into Boston and try to convince me to not preach these dangerous opinions in church.
Because you were a clergyman, maybe you had some lesser treatment than someone else would have.
Well, there's that, but I did refuse. I was going to preach my ideas. Mm-hmm. So they did put me on trial, and the crime that I had committed was having new and dangerous opinions. New and dangerous opinions. That's it. They sentenced me to exile, but I was sick at the time, and it was October. Crossing back, my exile would be back to England, and crossing the Atlantic in October would be a deadly practice for me, for one so sick as me. So they did allow me to stay in Salem until the springtime, when I would be better and the weather would be better for me to leave, as long as I did not preach those opinions in church. Now, I did agree. I would not preach those opinions in church. I got back up to Salem, and I did not preach them in church. We discussed them at the kitchen table after Sunday services, and soon my house was more crowded than the churches were. This was too much for the magistrates in Boston. They did send soldiers at the end of January from Boston up to Salem to arrest me and put me on the next ship back to England. But someone warned me, and I will keep his name out of this, but he warned me that they were coming.
So in the middle of the night,
in the middle of the night,
a blizzard,
in the middle of winter. Now you must understand English winters. English winters, if we get a dusting of snow on the ground and it goes just near freezing, that is severe English winter weather. Your New England winters, this snow was above my hip. The temperatures were so cold that when I did finally get down here, this Narragansett Bay was completely frozen over. We do not have temperatures like that in England. We do not have weather like that in England. That's part of this new world that you have here. But if I stayed at home, I would be arrested and put on the next ship back to England, and my life would be in peril. So I did set out in the middle of the night into the wilderness. Now, I can follow a road as well as anyone else, but with this much snow, there were no roads, there were no tracks, there were no signs, and I did shortly get lost. And without the help of the native peoples here, some Wampanoag did find me, take me in, and bring me to a place where I could spend the winter. They did support me and shelter me and feed me all winter.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Well, this is something.
Were you surprised? Were these your friends?
These were friends of friends. These were people that I could speak to. These were people that knew people that I knew. We did speak of that as we were moving from Salem down towards the Narragansett Bay. There's something that many English do think that the native peoples here are in some way violent. I did write in my book, Key to the Language of America, that boast not, proud English, of thy birth and blood. By thy neighbor Indian is by birth as good. Of one blood God made him and thee and all, as wise, as fair, as strong, as personal. These people are just like any Englishman. They have a sense of humor. Some are quick to laugh, some are a little bit more dour, but they are just like any other people, anywhere. They did see me in need, and the one thing they did that the English did not do was take me in, give me shelter, give me food, and take care of me.
You were what we would call now Rumford, is that right? Or where were you?
That is land that Massasoit, the great leader of the Wampanoag, did give to me. And people from Salem came down. We started building our houses. We started planting our crops.
They heard you were there.
Yes. And other people heard we were there. We received a letter from the governor at Plymouth. And it did say, as much as we like you, Roger, you're still within the bounds of the Plymouth colony and must leave. So, the boundary of the Plymouth colony is the great Seekonk River. They said, if you go across that river, just across the river, we can all live as good neighbors. So I did get in a boat, cross the Seekonk River, and that's where the story is that I ran into Narragansett at the Slate Rock jutting out into the river. And they did halloo me with, what cheer, Neetop. I did tell of my situation, and they did tell me, go around the point, come up the Great Salt River to the saltwater cove that is there.
And that is what we call Providence.
That is where the root of Providence was. It was God's providence to me in my distress. After everything that I had been through, the Narragansett did not sell this to me. They gave this to me. This was a gift. We were to be good neighbors. That is the price of the gift, to live together as neighbors.
And Mary was with you, and you had a child named Providence.
Providence. Nice young boy. Yes.
You were there, but you didn't you start a store?
Well, the trading post that I started was down south on Narragansett Bay, closer to the heartland of the Narragansett, at a place called Cocomscusick. It's a trading post that we did trade, made it easier for them, for English goods, as I said before, the knives, kettles, hoes, axes, blankets, coats, and they would bring food and furs, which the English did pay dearly for.
And those were sent back to England. So you were sort of in the middle of a circular trade.
They went to Plymouth, they went to Massachusetts Bay. The furs would go back to England, but the food, was used for the local population. Then
some differences started. First, there was the war with Pequot. Could you talk about that a little bit? Because that's very distressing. The role is confusing. You were the eyes and the ears of the Narragansett, I hear.
Well, I was the eyes and ears of the Massachusetts Bay, if you would. I did go down to negotiate with the Narragansett and the Mohegan to see what was going to be happening. There were conflicts, there was strife, there were murders, and I went down to the Narragansett to see where they stood in all of this. And when I get there, it is a grand conference with the Mohegan and the Pequot, all there at one place.
The Mohegan from New York?
No, Mohegan from Connecticut.
Ah.
And they're all there in one place. Uncas, the leader of the Mohegan, the Narragansett, and the Pequot are all there negotiating what is going to happen. I was able to have the Narragansett and the Mohegan listen to me and not join with the Pequot. For if there had been a general uprising, so many people would have been killed. As it was, the English in Boston did see the Pequot as having begun by attacking Englishmen, an English sailor off the coast, an English trading post down near the Pawcatuck River, and they did send troops from Massachusetts Bay, from Plymouth, and from the New Connecticut colony to go in there and attack the Pequot at their fort on the Missatuck River. This was warfare the way the English fight warfare. They went in, they attacked, and they did set fire to this place. Upwards of 700 people killed. The Narragansett and the Mohican did look at this and say, this is horrible. This is not the way to fight a war. And the English response to them at this battle was, we'll kill them all and let God sort them out.
Oh dear, they put a theology on it.
Right.
Okay, so Massachusetts, then somehow Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Plymouth became estranged or enemies of Rhode Island at some point after that.
We had differences, and because our base philosophy was this personal freedom, that the government has no control over church, that church is something that, church or faith, is something for the individual to determine. They looked at us as being rejects from everywhere. For Anne Hutchinson, just 2 years after I left Massachusetts Bay, she was tossed out of the Massachusetts Bay. I helped with her party to negotiate for the town of Portsmouth on the island of Aquidneck. A year or so after that, William Cotting did split from that group and take more people down and found the town of Newport. Several years after that, Samuel Gorton is tossed out of Plymouth Colony, is tossed out of Portsmouth, has a fight with the people at Patuxet, and then, after much trial, starts the settlement that is now called Warwick. All of these towns did have at their root the idea that the government does not tell you what to believe. I made 2 trips back to England to get paperwork for this. All these 4 towns, if you would. The first in the 1640s, 1642, stayed for 2 years working on this paperwork and got a patent from Parliament saying that this Providence Plantations in Narragansett Bay in New England in America has a boundary. We are a colony that has the right to determine our own future. For before that paperwork, Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth, and Connecticut all wanted our land, and we had nothing from the Crown to say that they could not. This parliamentary paperwork displeased some down in Newport, and they wished, well, William Cottington declared himself governor for life, so we needed to get a more definitive piece of work.
You and he are not friends.
We have our disputes, let us put it that way. So John Clark and myself did leave Rhode Island and go over to England. I did come back a few years later, leaving John Clark as our agent. And he did work strenuously until the Restoration. This is during the Commonwealth. These are people that I know that are in charge in England. Oliver Cromwell is the Lord Protector. The king has been ousted and beheaded. Did spend time with friends there. Did try and work this through, but my needs were back in Rhode Island, if you would. And John Clark did stay there.
Were you in danger at all?
In England?
Yes.
No. But John Clark did stay there, and upon the restoration of Charles II to the throne, did persuade him to give Rhode Island a royal charter. And this charter for Rhode Island and Providence Plantations did take in Warwick, did take in Newport, did take in Portsmouth, did take in Providence as being one royal colony. Did take the Narragansett country as being part of that colony. That the Narragansett sachems were great princes and people, that they were included in this charter as under the king's protection. All of this.
All of John Clark's ideas.
Well,
is that right?
Not just John Clark.
Well,
it was my ideas as
he,
well. John Clark has this amazing
influenced
ability.
The king is what I'm saying.
Well, he had the amazing ability to make my ideas sound a little bit more palatable. I am very argumentative, and he had the way to make them more easily accessible, if you would. He also knew well how to play the political game. For Upon the Restoration, Charles went after all of the regicides, all of the people that had killed his father during the English Civil War. And they were arrested, tried, and executed. But some did flee and go to Massachusetts and Connecticut, for they were all good Puritans in those colonies. Now, Charles was not going to send an army to come and arrest them. But the way politics works, what's the worst thing you could do to two theocracies but put a place right between them with complete religious freedom? Our charter says that no person in this colony may be punished for what they believe, that we shall make no religious laws, that all Englishmen here and all people may be able to follow what is their own conscience, that we should elect our own governor and elect our own General Assembly, that each town send representatives to meet and make our own laws and govern ourselves. There had never been a document giving anyone this much freedom under the English. All we must do is subject ourselves to the king. Aside from that, we govern ourselves.
Do you consider that your greatest achievement?
In part. See, it's all part of one thing. When we established Providence and these other towns, the idea is that religion is too important to be tied to government. Government is about the here and now. It is about paying taxes for mutual support, to build roads, to take care of things that need to be taken care of. It is about fighting an enemy. It is about the here and now. But the faith is about so much more than that, that they should be entirely separate. For if they are not, they will corrupt each other. People in government will use faith to motivate people to fight a war against another faith, when it is truly about money or land or property or such. If they are entirely separate, then government needs its authority from somewhere else. It is not, as the King's Charter says, Charles II by the grace of God King. But it harkens back to the Magna Carta, that Parliament assembled are the representatives of the people. And as I wrote in 1640 that the sovereign, original, and foundation of civil power lies in the people. The people should form what government they wish and have it give it as much power as they wish it to have, and to last only as long as they need it.
Roger Williams, I don't know how to thank you for your legacy. All of us have been changed by you. We thank you so much for being here today and for really letting us know what you've been thinking. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. This is Good News Rhode Island. I'm sure you're going to help to make that same kind of good news in your own town.